Well, welcome to Parenting Across Color Lines. We usually have more people, but we have a great group tonight, I promise. As I said, I am Jessica Shodecki. I am the program coordinator. Since there's not very many of us, maybe we can kind of share a little bit about our situation so that Justin kind of understands. My husband is Nigerian, and I have a 3-year-old biracial son. Lana, do you want to go next?
I'm Lana Wilkin. I have a 9-year-old who just turned 9-year-old. Sorry, 9. Literally 2 days ago. Daughter, African-American daughter who's adopted, and a 7-year-old biracial son who's about to get in trouble. Stop that. Also adopted.
And I'm Angela Palmer-Wackerly.
And I'm Matt Wackerly.
And we have a 6-year-old African-American son, Luke, who we adopted from birth.
And Justin, we can just go into the very first question about, tell us a little bit more about who you are, including your background, your family background, and how you got into law and politics and such.
First, I know you sent a list of questions, but I did not read them. I've been in court, so I apologize. So you're going to
get
the true, raw, kind of uncut version. I have a stuffed up nose. It's not COVID related for those who might be zooming in later. But it is, my background is simple. I was born and raised in Omaha. My mother actually lived in Coffeyville, Kansas, and got ran out of Coffeyville, Kansas in 1979. And she came up to Omaha to give birth to me, where I was adopted. I was adopted by a biracial couple. So nobody knew I was adopted until I shared it with them. I always knew I was adopted. I can't ever recall not knowing that I was adopted. And then I kind of was always involved in the community. I used to intern for Senator Nelson, U.S. Senator Nelson. Never really wanted to get into politics, but I coached basketball. And so my 6th grade basketball team in 2008, when I was complaining about things going on in the community and different standards, because we would have kids at different schools. We weren't a feeder program. We would have kids from all over Omaha going to different high schools. And Tyler Hall, Kevin Harkins, Jordan Nash, and a couple of the kids just said, well, you always tell us don't complain about it, do something. So I got called out by some 6th graders. So I said, fine, if I'm going to run for office, you guys are my campaign managers. So we had about 5 kids running my first campaign for a learning community. And then we went out of town actually for a tournament in 2010, and I was complaining about OPS. And those same kids reminded me of what I always taught them. So they were my campaign managers for my 2010 OPS campaign, where I got on the school board, and kind of the rest is history. I didn't want to run for legislature. Actually, Jill Brown was running, I think early as November. And by January, when I would go to the stores, people just were like, hey, we like Jill, but everything is getting so divisive. And it's no knock on Jill. She's a nice person. They were like, we just need somebody who can get something done. And I was literally getting recruited, not by parties, but by people in the community. So I was like, all right, fine. So I ran and forgot to mute my own phone. So everybody watching, you should probably mute your phones. And so that's kind of how I got into politics. I've always been, because of my background, my mom, my adopted parents, one is from Omaha, my African-American father, and my Caucasian white mother is from small town Iowa. So I spent many moons on a farm in small town Iowa, and I think it allowed me to, one, be successful where I'm at in politics, because I've been able to get some things done that other urban senators haven't been able to get done. I've been able to toe the line or be in the middle or on the fence with all these radical people say on both sides that I'm in the middle, but it's not. I'm just, I'm situational, and I think everybody should look at the situation and do what's best for that bill and that situation instead of towing party lines. And so that's how I was kind of brought up, and that's just the people around me. And I tell people I have the best for both worlds, and I have the the worst of both worlds sometimes. So one of the big bills we passed when I overrode the governor was Metro Transit, and we created a regional transit authority, which after this election cycle, they'll probably start the process of becoming an elected board where they'll have a taxing authority, and passing a taxing authority under Ricketts in a conservative legislature was very difficult. But the day that we overturned her, and I say we because it was, it was my bill, but we overturned the governor, I didn't even talk about the bill. If people go back and watch it, I talked about my story of growing up in Omaha, but being biracial and being a small town. And the point of it is sometimes you got to step out of your ideology of being a rural conservative and say, you know what, I'm gonna do what's best for this community because they need it. And making those worlds collide in the sense that we did on that day, we overrode the governor. It was a big deal considering taxes and taxing authority. But that also adds a lot of pressure because you carry a lot of weight with it. But that's kind of how I got into politics. And one of the bills that we were able to do that I think is directly related to my race, but not because I'm Black or biracial, but because I was able to pull two sides together because of that uniqueness.
That's a great answer. I was going to say, well, welcome, Felicia. Before I jump into all these questions, I know that I kind of gave you guys a heads up about it. So did you guys have any questions that you wanted to ask first?
Well, I just wanted to ask a follow-up question.
Okay, yeah.
So thank you so much for that answer, Senator. So can you explain, because you said a lot, like you were able to work with both sides, right? And so I definitely understand what you're saying with like situational, with context, identities, communication, that sort of thing. But can you give like a specific example of like I'm just thinking of how Luke, when he gets older, how he might be able to do that too, right? So.
Well, a lot of it is just historical information that I got just through life. I hate to say it that way. So the dynamics of me is that even with my family, I was too white for most of my community, and I would tell any biracial kid to get involved in sports because, unfortunately, there's still a stigmatism out there of athletics and those are your way to college and that's what's important to the culture. But it also connects you with the culture. So I was real good in sports. So that kind of bridged that gap on the sports side, but I never really hung out with a whole bunch of African Americans, nor did I really hang out with white people in that sense because I was too Black. So it's that dynamic of being there. But that historical fact gathering of going through all of that, when I could sit down with Kurt Friesen, Senator Friesen from small town Nebraska, and say, he was doing some construction project and I went out there and hopped in a skid loader and then I hopped in the combine. And I was like, man, this is way different than my grandpa's. They look at you as a person. They're like, well, this isn't some urban kid who drives around in Cadillacs or something that whatever they might think. They're like, he actually knows a little bit about how to function on a farm and it's a different level of respect. So it's kind of what I would tell you to tell kids in a biracial setting is meet people where they are, but don't change who you are. So you got to make everybody feel comfortable to have a conversation. And I don't think it's wrong. And I would say this to anybody. I don't think it's wrong if you're talking to somebody who's rich, conservative, and Republican and white to identify with some of the things they might like to build that relationship. You're not selling out. I'm not saying sell your soul, but I'm saying it's okay to like country music. It's okay to have a song, to have a conversation about a country musician and a song with somebody, because then they're going to look at you as a human. And you know what? They may ask you about hip hop, and that's how you bridge the gap. So I would tell people, so that's one example of how you meet people where they are, but you don't change who you are, but you embrace the culture you get by having all these different cultures around you. I don't know if that directly answered your question, but I'm sorry. Again, I'm just kind of talking off the cuff, so.
No, it was perfect. Thank you so much.
And I agree. I said, if you don't establish a relationship in some way, then how can you build and make changes?
Lana, were you saying something? Oh, you were yelling at Daniel.
Yelling at my kid, sorry.
Sorry. Okay, so
Now, so some of you guys in the beginning though mentioned that you have African kids. So what's going to be interesting is, so there's levels to everything, and so we have, and I think about the Buffetts, and then I think about Susie, then I think about the next generation. Like that also applies to race, and believe it or not, there's clashes. Like for my community, there is a difference between being Black and being African, flat out, and it's going to take generations to change, for all that to intermingle. So my answers that I'm giving may not pertain to African, because that is a completely different culture. In fact, I had a lady come in who, during the riots, one of the cops cut off her wristband, and it was something that was prayed over her culture, and so I kept trying to say, well, if we go after and we sue the city, there's got to be a value to it. Like I got to put a damage to it. And this is still my ignorance when I'm talking to this person, and she's like, you can't put a value on it. And I'm trying to get her to understand that we're in this judicial system that operates off of dollars, because you can't go back and create that because it's gone. So how do I do that? And I think that's what we're going to see a lot more and more as we have more immigrants come who are not assimilating with American culture, this first generation. And so I think it's going to be a lot harder for you all to bridge that gap, just because there's going to be things in their culture that we as Americans still can't comprehend to that level. I mean, I get it that you can't replace it. And I try to use the example when I was explaining to her that, there's a family photo and the house burns down. You can't replace that family photo. But when you talk about pain and suffering, if it's some intentional act, you got to put a value to it at some point. And getting people to understand that when it comes to cultural things is very difficult when you try to change that dynamic. So that's the best example I can give you of some of the struggles you guys are going to have. Is just it doesn't mesh with the culture.
That's a great point. That's kind of what I was going to talk about next too, was can you kind of have a little bit, but talk a little bit more about what it's like to have mixed races in your family, and maybe some things that you really appreciated about your parents, your white parent and your Black parent, and what they might have done to help you.
So I'll give some specific examples, because if I start thinking generally, I'll probably just start cussing.
Cussing's okay if you need to.
So I have a uncle, or no, a cousin. He's my second cousin. Like if Trump came today with COVID, he would stand there next to him and breathe all the air. Like that's his guy. Like it doesn't matter. Like we're gonna share the same. We're gonna go out together, me and Trump, with COVID. Like that's just his mentality. And I have other side. And what's crazy is it's mostly stereotypical, my white side, but sometimes it crosses over. But then I have like my Black side, who is like, I mean, if Trump died tomorrow, like people are probably gonna celebrate. And so on my Facebook feed, I see all this and none of them talk to each other. But the night that Trump didn't denounce white supremacy, that's kind of the first time I posted really anti-Trump or anything. And that's because of James Scurlock and a couple other things. My family was getting threatened. And I made a post basically, if anybody's supporting Trump after this, understand you are supporting the people who are basically physically trying to hurt me. And we're creating a platform that allows them to do that. And one of my cousins responded on my Facebook, and then she took it off and then instant messaged me. But my other cousin, the one I was saying about Trump, he responded to me like, well, Justin, you were discriminated before Trump. And I'm like, I get that. And he was like, oh, and he listed all these Twitter things of when Trump has denounced white supremacy before. I said, I get that too. But you're on the world stage on every network. You got to do it. Like, it doesn't matter how many times you say it. You got to do it then. And a failure to do that shows me a failure of leadership. And he couldn't say nothing else about it. He was just like, oh, shit, I agree with you. But Justin, there's always other issues. And I'm like, okay, we're fine. Like, but don't think it's not important. And at that moment, again, it was back to his personal level of where he was. So I got the crazies. And then another example is like the COVID situation. And it's kind of both sides are equal. Like I got crazy white cousins who think it's just a hoax, and I got crazy black cousins who think it's just a hoax. And they're on Facebook loving it and interacting together. And then when it comes to Trump, they all hate each other. It's like, so you get the best of both worlds and you get the worst. And I think for my parents, it was just always difficult trying to balance that. And my mom, who was white, didn't understand race, in my opinion. Although she got it a lot with my dad when they would go out, or even when we would drive in a small town, Rolfe, Iowa, and they'd be like, oh, the black people are here. She didn't get it until my seventh grade year, when our Jeep was stolen and we ended up finding it. And a week later, my brother was driving with my other cousins and I was in the back, and we got pulled over like a block from our house. And my mom got the phone call because the car was still reported stolen. And my mom, who sounds white, was talking to the officer and was like, well, my son's driving. His name is Jeremy, and he's driving. And the cop was like, well, ma'am, your son's Jeremy, this guy sitting here is black. And she was like, well, yeah, he's biracial. And it wasn't until that moment when she came around the corner, we're all handcuffed sitting on the ground like we were terrorists or something, that she realized that it's really a different world, because it was personal to her. And so you think you'll know it, but until you actually see it, not when they come home and tell you about it, it'll hit you differently. Mm-hmm. And those are kind of like the two, from even now to even back then, how it's just the way it is. And just don't lie about it. Just tell your kids the truth. Even if you think they can't handle it, they will.
How old did you say you were when that happened?
I think I wasn't. So my brother's 3 years older. He was driving. He was 16. So I'd have been 13. So that'd have been 7th or 8th grade year.
Okay. So you said like before that, you don't think your mom really got it. So can you explain that more and maybe talk about, because that's kind of what this group is about. Like, we want to get it now so that we're not, getting it when they're 20 and we're not supportive. So like, is there things that maybe could have been more helpful that you missed?
No. I mean, I think, so when my grandfather died in 6th grade, I became a Muslim. And then by 9th grade, I wasn't. I was hardcore Malcolm X, and my mom supported it. My mom used to watch Ernie Chambers on Channel 22, which is a public access channel. So I don't think race ever, like, we always talked about it, but it was always different after that night. So what I would tell you is like a lifeguard who's always trained to do CPR. But when that moment hits, like, you trained for it, so you know how to do it, it's different. It's when everything around you gets smaller and you start getting that tunnel vision, and it's like, this shit is real. Like, I know we talked about it. I know my son always said that maybe I was getting picked on because I didn't have kinky hair or I was too black or whatever. But when it becomes life or death with cops and guns, it's like it's an eye opener. And I'm not saying she was never conscious about it. I think she was, but it's different. And I just remember our conversations about race took a different tone after that, because it wasn't no longer try harder, you're going to get over it. I mean, that conversation still kept kept happening, that you're going to have to, as a Black person, you're going to have to work 2 times as hard. That's just common. I mean, that's something I grew up on, that my dad and my mom both shared. But it was just like, well, shit, now you might die over this. And that's a different depth that I think took her in a different way. And had it not happened so close to her house, had it not happened the way it happened, you know what I'm saying? I think she still wouldn't have had that conversation, or still wouldn't have felt that way.
How did she react to it, and what did you think of the way that she reacted to it?
Well, because I thought she reacted appropriately, but I think it had more to do with
oh, I have another link. Sorry, I have another link I'm going to put in here, because if we run out of time, which we're going to, we have the basic Zoom. We're nonprofit.
well,
So,
I mean, hey, anytime you want to do it, you can use my law office Zoom. Anytime y'all want to do it, you just tell me and I'll give you the Zoom,
okay.
and you can have fun with it. But what I was gonna say is I think she responded appropriately. I don't think she didn't respond appropriately. I just think it hit her completely different. You know, I mean, I can't really explain no other way than that. I mean, I think she responded appropriately. I think she always talked about it. But I think what stuck out for her was, it's one thing when race is in your face, right? It's one thing when you see a Black and you see a white. But this was based off of how she talked. Because didn't nobody know she was white. The car was in my dad's name and her name. She answered the phone. It was because the officer assumed by how she talked she was white. So it was something that wasn't even seen. It was just like, well, man, wait a minute. The kids here are Black and you sound white. She was like, well, yeah, I am white. My son's biracial. I mean, I think that hit her at a different level too, because it was probably her first time that it wasn't in your face. It was something that just how you sound.
Like, because she had to deal with it.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. Does anybody have any other questions they want to ask about that real quick, or no?
I do. You know, I look at, when I heard your story, my concern was, what if I didn't act appropriately? You know, when I see that this is happening to my child, you know, that and my daughter's female and Asian, but you know, if I see her handcuffed and sitting on the ground and driving her own car, you know, even though it's in my name. So I don't know, I might not act appropriately like your mom did. So
The biggest thing, and this is what I even tell all my parents, and I tell my kids now too, and the kids that I coach. One, when it comes to police, I'd rather be judged by 12 than buried by 6. I mean, we're not going to argue day, time, and place. We're going to just comply. But for parents, how you react to race is just as important as if you don't react. And what I mean by that is if you overreact and make it a big issue, it becomes a big issue. And I'm not saying it's not a big issue, because it is. But if I don't prepare my son, who now is 3/4 white, and will probably only get dark like me in the summertime, if I don't prepare him to be like, look, you're gonna have to work hard. Either if you don't, you're gonna have to work twice as hard. It is what it is. You gotta show up on time. You might even have to be there 2 minutes early, because if you're not, you're gonna perpetuate a stereotype. If I don't prepare them for that, then I feel like I'm doing a disservice. But at the same time, I still wanted to address any inequalities or prejudice or racial. But what I can't do is blow it way out of proportion or flip out on somebody. I mean, I had people use the N words in front of some people, and even my daughter was there, and I'm like, hey man, just relax. I ain't cool. And he kind of got a little loud, but I'm like, I can make a scene over this and make it real bad, or I could talk to my daughter afterwards about this just an ignorant dude, and there's a time and place for that. And right now, me arguing with him is going to do what? Who has more to lose? Me as a state senator beating up a guy at a Nebraska game, or him? I mean, really, what's the point? And I think that's more important, that conversation, than necessarily fighting against racism. I think that's too many people want to jump up and fight against it, but all we're doing is allowing that to become an excuse sometimes. I don't want that.
What can we, as a mixed family, race family, be looking for to help our children as they grow and how can we help advocate for change?
Biggest thing is time to embrace it. Embrace all of it. Show them as many things that are different. Because at some point, power is going to leave some of the majority, and it's going to come back to relationships among people. And I don't know when that is, but enjoy everything. So if you got a small town, a cousin in small town, Nebraska, Iowa, go out there for a day and do nothing. I mean, seriously, because that experience will one day connect them with somebody in college that came from a small town. And it's those kind of things that genuinely help people understand how to move things forward in life. Because it's one thing, and to segue into your politics, it's one thing to look at people as a number. It's one thing to look at people as a Dem or a Republican, but it's really hard to look at people as people and make policy decisions. It's really hard to look at people as people and not try to help everybody out. It's just hard to do. It's kind of that old saying, people don't want to look at what they eat. Well, they don't want to kill what they eat. They just want to eat it. Because it's hard. It's hard for you to be like, I don't care about poor people. If you know some people who are struggling or poor and you're like, man, I just casted a vote that takes away your health care. Sorry. That's a hard thing to do. So yeah, just have them go do stuff. Do stuff that are culturally different, that are fun and sometimes boring. Boring's okay.
Good answer.
Is it Lena or Lana Wilkins? Are you in an undisclosed location? You got nothing behind you. I'm just, should I be moving? I'm like a little worried here.
Here we go. There we go.
Oh, okay. All right.
If I were down in the office, it would actually be an undisclosed location. But yeah.
So something that we discussed in a previous group meeting was about educators, and that there is quite a lack of diversity among educators. Is that something that's being talked about or worked on?
Lip service. Sorry, I'm just a little blunt about it.
That's okay.
We don't want to do what it really takes to. I mean, every year, it's interesting. The last 30 days, we had a study that comes out that says Omaha lacks diversity, and some survey about diversity is really bad here in Omaha and upper mobility, et cetera, et cetera. Then a week later, the same chamber puts out, City of Omaha is one of the greatest places to work. Well, you can't have both. You can't have people who say it lacks diversity and discrimination at the same time and saying it's a great place, one of the greatest places in the country to work. Like, there's a disconnect somewhere. Mm-hmm. And nobody really wants to deal with the disconnect, because if you deal with the disconnect, the only way to deal with the disconnect is to be uncomfortable. And that's what this election has, at the national level, has forced me and my friends to deal with. Because I mean, it's no secret, I know and hang out with a lot of Republicans, and we differ on a lot of things. But this election has forced me to say, how can you really do that when you're talking about me? Like, you can't separate me from the equation. And even Democrats, when I call them, we Democrats have this savior complex that we know what's best for you and your community, so we're going to tell you what to do. And I'm like, how can you do that when you're really talking about me? And that's hard. In order to change the education problem as far as diversity, people got to feel uncomfortable. People have to be willing to give up their seat at the table, and they don't want to do that. So I think it's just lip service until we're almost forced to, where companies are deciding, I'm not coming to, so like, for example, I passed a bill that is on the ballot to remove slavery from our Constitution. And right now, I don't think it's going to pass. But I'll tell you, we will lose opportunities, because there are corporations who will think that's just a backwards thinking of Nebraska. And we already have. When we sit in the legislature and we don't take LGBT protections to a vote because neither side wants it to happen because it'll make Nebraska look bad, we have a problem. We're all complicit in the same problem. So we don't want to change those. I don't think we really want to change those numbers.
Something you kind of touched on a little bit a few times is you talked about how like sometimes your friends or people that you know you as Justin, and they don't necessarily like understand that you are also like, so for me, for instance, people love my husband, he's great, my family loves him, but you know, they're gonna vote against him and immigrants and everything, or what, you know, whatever. But and the other families have the same situation. Like, how do you explain to people that you're not just Justin? What's a good way for us to explain that to people so that they understand that they're, you know, do you know what I'm asking?
Yeah, I do. Well, we're always going to have, you know, cousins like my crazy cousin who will breathe COVID with Trump, literally will pass a pipe and breathe it with him if he could. And those people, I mean, I don't want to say you write them off, but you got to just accept it. And you got to accept, you know, what value they bring to your family and what they don't, which is often tough. The other ones, like my cousin in Minnesota, I mean, we grew up together. She's my age. And I feel like I might not get to her this election, but maybe I will. But I'm also somebody who isn't a straight hard left Democrat all the way down. Like there's a certain, like, I believe the problem with North Omaha is jobs, and that's a very Republican issue. It's about how do you grow the economy. That's a very Republican issue. History and theoretically it is. So I try to find common ground there, but it doesn't help when we're not talking about issues. We're just throwing out negativity towards everybody. And so I try to do that. And so I haven't gave up hope on everybody, but we're using COVID as an excuse not to see some people this year. So
That's so true. Okay, well, maybe I should edit that out.
No, I'm okay with it. I gave a thumbs up.
Hey, Angela,
did you this message?
I mean, I did have a question, but it's probably, I don't know if it's that important really, but you said you don't think that's going to pass, the one with removing slavery from.
No, because one, we couldn't fundraise enough because candidates across the state, when COVID happened, they couldn't go door to door. So you'll see campaigning this year have rocketed. I mean, the numbers are skyrocketing of what they're raising. I mean, I'm seeing TV ads for legislature. Like that's just unheard of, because they couldn't go door to door to try to play catch up. And it's not a sexy issue. And so there's a part in there about involuntary servitude and what people are saying, well, then people in prisons can't work. And I'm like, no, they volunteer for those positions. Like, if you want to go work the field, even though we don't do that, but in California, theoretically, if you want to go work the fires, you volunteer for that. There's nothing, they can't make you do that. And trying to explain that to people, but you know, there's a guy on Twitter who likes to chase me, and he's like, you think you know more than the founding fathers? And I'm like, no, you need to go back and look at Nebraska's history. And the 30-second version is when they passed the 13th Amendment, 14th and 15th Amendment, they kept slavery as a form of punishment because it was a way for them to enslave the free slaves through a felony conviction. And what had happened was, during that time, they went all around the South, and you saw these same things around can't vote because you're a felon, and you can be punished by slavery or indentured servitude, because it's easier to convict an African American at the time. And the reason they added indentured servitude was for Asians, because we had a lot of Asians working on the railroad, and so, or Chinese particularly. So when it came to Nebraska, we were actually vetoed twice. One was a pocket veto, and the second time, Andrew Johnson just said, I ain't gonna do it. And it was because all of our founding documents as a state were for white men only. And you can go back and look at our Constitution of 1865. We ratified it in 1873, and that wasn't approved either. And we came back to the 1875, I think it was 75. And finally, Congress was clear and said, we will accept you. And we were the only state at that time, and later Utah. But our condition on being part of the union was to allow African Americans to be free and to allow everybody to vote. That's Congress made that clear, that you couldn't be a state unless you did that. So we were the only state that, if you look at our founding documents in Congress, it has conditions. It literally says conditions. And so once that passed, we said, okay, we're going to do slavery. And although we weren't a slave state, we had convict leasing up until 1930. Lincoln County had convict leasing up until 1930. And it wasn't until FDR put a federal mandate against it, basically saying you're going to lose highway funds, that Nebraska stopped doing it. So we had convicts all across the state being leased out for pennies all the time. And you were made to do that. So it wasn't this foreign idea. And somebody's like, this is just for show. And I'm like, it isn't. Our Constitution means something. At least I think it does. And it's about our values and what we hold truth, and what a state should be. And I don't want, 200 years from now, them looking back at this territory or Nebraska state and being like, you could punish people by slavery. That's a great idea. So yeah, it's just crazy. I don't know if it'll pass. Now, in fairness, Colorado, the first time in 2016, tried it. It didn't pass, and they came back in 2018, and it did pass. But the reason they came back in 2018 is they lost a lot of business. They lost a lot of companies who negatively reflected on Colorado. So they put a whole bunch of money behind it and got it passed in 2018.
I'm glad you asked that, Angela.
A lot of Jeopardy trivia there that you won't ever use in your life, but just.
Oh, I had no idea about that history. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I didn't either.
I did hear one, I think, radio announcement about that one, though.
Really?
I didn't even realize that was coming up. So I will be voting for with
You got, and the way we write our stupid petitions, you got to vote for removing slavery. That's just the way.
I know, that's what's so confusing sometimes.
Yeah.
In the correct way.
Yeah.
So some of the laws and stuff I was going to talk about was like the hair discrimination law. It failed. I know that. Is it going to come back? Have you guys talked about that at all?
If it stays in the same form, it'll keep getting vetoed. And I get it. I don't agree with Ricketts' interpretation of how he reads it, but reasonable minds can differ if you deem him reasonable. It'll come back, but they got to make some changes to it. So I think it'll pass. I don't know. I mean, we're going to have this election is going to determine a lot. I mean, there's a couple key races that could flip a lot of things. And I don't say flip like we're going to swing far left, but it'll make folks come to the negotiation table on how to move some things. And I hope that happens. So at least it's fair and we can have some common ground and get something done.
Can you talk a little bit about the Commission on African American Affairs and your part in it, and what does that mean? Yeah,
so I created a commission this year because we already have a Native American one and we have a Latino one, and we never had an African American one. We did in the 50s, but then somehow that changed in the 60s to become a Equal Opportunity Commission, the EEOC. And I guess they just assumed only Black people file claims, and that's why, I don't know, I guess that's what they assumed. So the purpose of it was whoever's in the governor's office should have some kind of direct communication to the communities that are most at risk. And those are Latino, Native American, African American, just statistically speaking. And so that's where it came from. And we created it. It passed pretty easy. And we'll see what, I mean, Ricketts appoints all his buddies, nothing may change, but I'm just tired of the excuse of, I didn't know. So hopefully this commission can be a sounding board to where a governor can't say, well, I didn't know this was an issue. Well, how do you not know? The African American Commission told you. And it isn't political because you get to appoint them, so you should know. Whereas if I say it, it's just Justin, being Justin.
Okay, awesome. Does anybody have any questions about those they want to add? Okay. Well, at one point you said that the city is, I'm talking about Omaha, is on the brink of change or destruction. Can you talk about the racial climate in Omaha, what it's looking like today in the future? And do you really think that we're going to see change, a good change, or what are you seeing for the future of our Black children?
I honestly don't know. I don't know. So about 6 years ago, I sent an email to the mayor. Me and her got into it, and I said we're gonna have something like Baltimore back when all that was going on in Baltimore 5 or 6 years ago. And she basically said that I was crazy and trying to invoke violence. And I was actually I was typing. I was trying to search the email, but I think it's on my other email account. And this has been brewing for a while. And Omaha is one of the most segregated cities in the country. It's directly related to redlining. Nobody wants to deal with that issue. We kind of dealt with it 2 years ago. Well, actually, we're kind of dealing with it, I guess, in this regard. 2 years ago, I passed a tax credit for first-time home buyers in certain, what we call extremely blighted areas, which is north to south Omaha. Lincoln has a little bit too. This year, we did a $10 million grant for Lincoln and Omaha in economic redevelopment areas, which is the term I coined, for affordable housing. So maybe that'll change a little bit of it. But we are very close to having major civil unrest. It's scary. I use the example of my wife, who hates guns, never wants them in the house, and she was like, "Okay, you have guns in the house, right?" Like, yeah, I do. Like, and I think it's just that time. Like, everybody is just like on edge, and if we don't get some true leadership to sit down and say, what are the issues? What are the common grounds we can talk about, and just get some small wins. It ain't even got to be like a police oversight commission with subpoena power, because that may be too much. But what if it's just we change some basic training and chokeholds and things like that to eliminate just some of that? Like, but everybody's into sound bites, and that's the problem. You got social media, you got Facebook, you got all Instagram and all these things, and nobody can have a conversation. And I think with COVID and everything, it's just feeding everything. In this election, I mean, I'm actually for the first time worried about what happens election night, and I've never felt that way. I'm worried about if one person doesn't win by a landslide, we're going to have 30 days of civil unrest until the final ballots are all counted, and then we're going to have another month till the Supreme Court decides, and everybody's going to be fraud here, fraud there. We're not giving up this, we're not giving up that, and it's a very scary time. And I look at Omaha. I guess this is back to your original question of running for office. Omaha, because of the racial makeup, because of the segregation, because of our school system, because of all these failing data points, if we got it right, we could be the model of how to do it for the rest of the country. And money isn't the issue. I mean, we give a lot of money to a lot of nonprofits. We get a lot of government grants to a lot of places, but yet I'm 41 and I lived here my whole life, and North Omaha hasn't changed. So I don't know where the money's going. I don't know what they're doing with it, but I think people are tired of all of that.
So it's not kind of on the same lines of that. What are some things that are coming up, or what are ways that we can advocate, or what can we do? What are some things we can do now?
Talk to people, get people out to vote, what I tell people is sweat the small stuff. And it's the little thing. It's the subtle racism, the subtle discrimination, the sleight of hand that people don't really pay attention to. I tell people to pay attention to, because that's where it starts. If you let it keep happening, then by the time it becomes an issue, there's no recourse but to blow up, and that's kind of where I'm worried about. We haven't dealt with our housing issue. We haven't dealt with our drug epidemic. We haven't dealt with any of those issues in a systematic way, block by block. We take a gunshot approach, and then when nothing changes, we'll say, "Oh, let's do another gunshot approach. Let's just shoot up in the air instead of down." I mean, we just keep changing directions instead of trying to say, we got literally in Omaha a area that is no bigger than 5 square miles. That's 90% of the problem in Omaha, and we don't solve it. That's just unexcusable to me.
I want to wrap up at like 7:30, so we got 5 more minutes. Do you guys have any more questions before I have a couple more, but I would rather you guys ask yours.
Oh, I found it. It was in 2015. She said, "My comments are totally irresponsible for an elected official." Sorry, it was bugging me. I had to figure out what I said.
Anybody have questions?
I had a question. I guess it's kind of two-part question. The unicameral was in session during all of the riots and everything this year, right?
No. So we left early and didn't come back until August.
Okay. Do you have a feel of what kind of what the take overall from everybody else is about that?
That's a trick question because 23 senators signed a petition or a letter requesting, I don't know what they're pounding on upstairs, requesting a special session to deal with racial social justice. 28 senators wanted to have a special session to get Nebraska football going. So. Now, don't get me wrong. I signed both of them. I'm gonna sign all of them. I'm all about let's just keep doing it. I mean, and we only had I'll take it back. I'm sorry, I messed up. We had 28 senators signed to requesting the governor to increase SNAP, to accept the federal program for SNAP. We had 31 senators say we would do Nebraska football. So I was wrong.
Yeah. So I know I keep asking these like policy related questions.
No, that's what they're supposed to be.
But like that one with the governor with SNAP still just blows my mind that we are the only state that said no. What was even I can't even find a justification for it other than, we don't need it, like, which is not true. So like, is there any sort of anything with that?
No, I'm not smart enough to understand. I mean, if the federal government's going to help us out and there's no strings attached, I'm not smart enough to understand. The question I ask is, if relying on the federal government to help us is so bad, then why are we taking them hundreds of millions of dollars in highway funds every year? Because that helps your rich friends get rich. Okay. Gotcha. Because you can't say it's just about federal dollars, and that's pretty much what they're saying is, we shouldn't rely on federal dollars. We got to do it the Nebraska way, our way. Well, we rely on federal dollars for a lot of stuff.
Well, and we took the CARES Act money, right? Because that's what Ricketts was saying, like, we're not going to give it to counties if you have a mandated mask policy. So, I mean, we're definitely taking some of it. That one is just so shocking to me.
Yeah, I agree.
I don't know how you can do it in good conscience. That's just, and I was just talking to my wife about this today. I think my problem is I'm not so far removed. I think maybe if I was removed and maybe I, lived up in Ponca Hills with nobody around me and I don't see them, maybe I would be cruel. I don't know. But I just feel like I can't go down the street and look somebody in the eye and be like, sorry, man, I know I could have got you Medicaid. Didn't cost me anything, but hey, sorry, you can't get no more SNAP. Sorry, you can't feed your kids. Sorry. I just can't in good conscience do. I don't know how people do that. and I don't mean a handout. I mean, there's always going to be people who abuse the system or whatever, but man, these families need it. Like, you got people who have been out of work for months and months. I don't get it. I never will. Well, now we just ended on a bad note. Everybody's
Right.
kind of like, yeah. Hate the government now.
Does anybody have any more questions? One I was going to ask is I just saw the other day there's a legislative resolution put out for an interim study on the historical practice known as redlining within Nebraska, whatever. Did you just put that out?
Yeah, we're going to have a hearing on it in a couple weeks. I don't know what I want to do with it yet. I'm trying to. So there's an interesting stat. Interesting stat is African Americans during slavery owned 1% of real property across the nation. 2020, African Americans own 1% of real property across the country. And so when I talk to my conservative friends, I say that can't just be because of laziness. Like, it just can't be because people don't want to work. Like, somewhere in there should move the needle, because 100% of the people just can't be lazy. And they're like, well, that's just an interesting stat. Well, why is there such a big problem to access to capital? I'm like, I don't know. They're like, it's no problem. You should be able to just walk in and get a bank or get a loan. I'm like, I'm glad you brought that up. Let's look at Wells Fargo in 2015 and 16 that paid billions of dollars in fine, or $100 million in fines for discrimination practices. This isn't from 1960. And then I got to remind people that a home or land is one of the most popular ways to pass on generational wealth. And if from 1865 to literally 1981, African Americans haven't been able to participate in that process, because if you look at redlining, that's exactly what it was. And if you look at the Omaha map, that's exactly what you see, what you got today. Then you have millions of people who've never been able to participate in passing on that generational wealth. And the correction can't just be, well, everything's fine now. And I'm not saying there should be reparations. That's just too damn complicated to figure out. I mean, you have an adopted African kid. Do they get reparations? And I'm adopted, and I don't know necessarily how long my parents have been here. Like, that's too damn complicated. But what I am saying is, those who want to work and those who are doing things right, we ought to be able to give them a leg up, regardless of race. Just look at geographical location. Like, if they're doing well in certain areas, it doesn't make sense for me that if I can start working at $11 an hour, and my job offers me $13 an hour, I have to turn it down because I'll lose my daycare. That just doesn't make sense to me. And that $2 that I gain will not cover my daycare costs. That makes no sense. But we expect that family to go out and buy a house. How? They're trapped at $11 an hour job because they can't make the jump. And nobody wants to talk about what do we do with that gap, because that's too much work. It's uncomfortable. And that's the part that we got to figure out with this redlining. We're getting to a point where the middle class is being cut out. It's like, you make too much to participate in the program, but shit, you don't make enough to survive. So what do you do? And that's where I'm trying to have this conversation around redlining, particularly Omaha and Lincoln, because the effects are still there. But particularly Omaha, you can lay the redlining map over race and demographics today in Omaha, and it's identical. And it can't just be because Black people are lazy. It can't just be because white people know how to use money better. There has to be some kind of systematic problem or obstacle that we're not really talking about and addressing. So that's the conversation I'm trying to have, but nobody really wants to have that. I think I'm gonna do the same day an interim study on SIDs. I don't even know if I will. I might just introduce a bill, which is only used in Douglas County and Sarpy County for the most part. But that's a huge problem of inequality. They're building $300,000 homes and getting tax breaks for it. If you ever want to Google Nebraska municipality bankruptcies, you'll see that we're number one in the country for it because we have all these little government entities called SIDs around Omaha that play with money. They file bankruptcies just so they can keep making millions. Yeah, great times.
Well, thank you.
All right. Well, I gotta go have a cigar because now I'm frustrated.
Okay. Well,
We're talking about all these things that I can't solve.
I hope we didn't get you frustrated, but we really appreciate your time.
Well, anytime you want to have a candid conversation, I'm easy to get a hold of. This is who I am. Like that's how I am on the floor. This is how I am every day. At the end of the day, if we don't make the world better than how we found it, then we're failing as a people. So